I'm just mentally ill in my relationship, which is why I started therapy. I'm trying to become less mentally ill in my relationship, but I'm still very mentally ill. And it's only been a
In
few.
your relationship is not a caveat that you need to add.
Okay, in all aspects of my life, I'm kind of mentally ill. But the catalyst for me joining therapy was me being crazy in my relationship. So, but I cut it a little short so that Louis and I could make this video.
I appreciate it, but I was going to answer like, oh, I think you need your therapy, Tiffany. Kyle, you're joining a really highbrow conversation we were just having.
Well, so for today's video, and the reason why Mr. Purple has joined, and I mean, Louis and I always talk about FTX, is that apparently some objections were filed to the plan, correct, Louis?
Yes.
Correct.
So voting is done. You can't vote anymore if you guys are FTX creditors, but yeah, some objections. And you said this was quite important. Is it juicy?
Well, I filed an objection. I don't
Oh,
know if you saw it, Kyle.
okay. So Louis filed an objection to the plan, even though you voted yes on the plan. Didn't you vote yes on the plan?
Yeah, it's called a limited objection. I'll let Kyle talk about it. I think I can't get in trouble if I'm not talking about it.
Okay.
I suppose. Your objection was an appropriate one because under the language of the plan, there is really broad authority for the debtors, and one area that relates to that's obviously important for creditors is the KYC process. And if the debtors have broad latitude, there's kind of these arbitrary drop dead deadlines of like, oh, if you don't respond within 60 days, I think was the number, then effectively just let see lapse if you don't do anything and your claim not be paid out. And so that's one, not an appropriate structure. So I know there's been plenty of people who've had kind of issues of like proving net worth and income, especially when like you're talking about a customer account balance from almost 2 years ago at this point. Like, yeah, you may be in a different income situation right now than you were before. I've seen some arbitrary KYCs where they're saying, oh, well, we need 3 months of bank statements to prove your net worth. And it's like, well, you may have all of your net worth tied into a bankruptcy. So it's a little bit of a unfair structure, and the language in the plan doesn't provide for the debtors to have an affirmative, we need to do this for us to be able to disallow your claim based on a KYC, right? So it's got to be a two-way street. There's got to be some level of like clarity, and given how bad the KYC process has kind of gone for this many numbers of people, obviously like some people had no issues, but plenty of others did. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to have, you know, the broad latitude that they get under the plan currently. So that is an appropriate objection that I hope Dorsey will at least take seriously, and hopefully the language will match what's appropriate there.
Do you think my reputation amongst the victims of FTX is going to be boosted by this or not boosted, or whatever the opposite is?
I think you're doing what's right. I mean, I know there's, you know, folks are talking about claim buyers, and obviously you have an incentive that's different than other people. That doesn't mean you're, you know, doesn't mean you're a bad guy. You have one level of incentive. I haven't seen you putting out, you know, overly aggressive FUD that like, you know, we've seen that from others. I won't name names, but you know, the KYC one is an appropriate one. It affects you as a claim buyer. It affects everybody as claimants.
We have put in an objection saying you can't randomly disallow claims if they don't fit your arbitrary or standard of KYC. You need to have actual guidelines and a real process that's public. Mm-hmm. It can't just be like, you know, your documents are good enough where you're applying different standards to different people. It's pretty unfair.
Yeah, and it's not even clear.
Keep your money if they're like, nah, we don't like you. You're saying something positive about me.
I have a few, you know, I've never said anything negative about you. You're neutral in my book, right? Like you know, I've never, if someone is a claim buyer, so we have your objection. I don't see that one being very contentious behind the scenes. The one that is a more interesting objection here, and interesting could be bad, is the US Trustee, because their points are 10 different, fairly significant objections.
Hey, it's me, Tiff, and in case you've never heard of me before, I've been independently covering fraud and bankruptcies in the crypto space. Because of this, I know a lot of people who follow me or might recognize me were once customers of FTX. Well, that's where FTX Creditor comes in. FTX Creditor will buy your FTX bankruptcy claim and pay you immediately in USDC. FTX Creditor has actually bought more FTX claims than all of the other claims buyers combined. FTX Creditor even buys small claims as low as $1,800, all the way up to claims as large as $10 million. So if you're interested in selling your FTX claim for immediate liquidity, or in selling your Voyager, BlockFi, or Celsius stub, you can go to ftxcreditor.com or contact them on Telegram at @FTXCreditor or on X at @FTXCreditor_com. Just to clarify, like the US trustee filed an objection to the plan.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Just to
the
clarify.
U.S. trustee is completely separate from like the independent examiner, right? So I've seen some inadvertent, statements tying them together. They both report up to the trustee's office, but a U.S. trustee is always on a case. They're effectively the cop in the bankruptcy court, right? They're there to make sure that bankruptcy code is being followed, nothing's slipping through the cracks. It's check and balance on the whole system. So when certain things come up, the U.S. trustee is the one that objects. Originally, in the very beginning of this case, the U.S. trustee was the first to object to Sullivan and Cromwell's appointment, one of the first things that happened in the case. So typically you see the U.S. trustee is a little bit more active in the beginning of the case when it's being set up, and then sometimes toward the back end here where you have certain things that matter to them. They're often going to have at least some kind of an administrative objection for language stuff from the U.S. trustee. That's super common. There are some pretty important structural changes that they're highlighting are needed, and I'd put them in kind of effectively like three buckets. You got like release, exculpation, discharge language in one bucket, and that's almost half of the U.S. trustees' objections. You got another few ones that are really kind of highly administrative in nature, and those are probably not very controversial, but will get ironed out behind the scenes. Some of the other ones that they have here are bigger structural issues. So the two main ones, which we can get into, are one that they're objecting to the structure of what's called Class 7, which is the convenience class, being kind of an unfair, non-legally justifiable basis to exclude certain customers from recovery just because they had a less than $50,000 claim. There's two ways that I see that one going. One, I think it's going to get to the to revote.
Sorry, you cut out a bit. So you said that there's one way you see this going, which could be a potential revote. I think that's what I heard from that.
If the objections were strong enough, if structurally can't pass, the absolute worst case scenario from a delay standpoint would be that it requires another vote. I'm not sure we're going to get to that. That's a pretty high bar, but between these two major structural objections, there's a non-zero chance of that. I think the convenience class 1 is one where you could justify, say, lowering the dollar number from 50K to something lower and saying, okay, you still voted, you're getting more money now. If you were a 40K creditor in convenience class and now you're not, it would be illogical to revote because everyone's getting more, not less, and it's not changing your rights. So that one I don't see as being an issue in terms of revoting, but it's going to change the waterfall, change the structure. So that may end up staying at 50. It may go down lower. I think that one's going to work its way out, and we'll find out on the 7th of October where that lands. The one that is more problematic, and I don't know exactly how this will play out because I know what the debtor's side will be, is that they're arguing the whole plan is trying to force a settlement called a 1919. It's, essentially you have all these settlements that happen in bankruptcy. They settle with Genesis, they settle with BlockFi, they settle with all these people. Those are, by definition, Rule 1919 settlements. You approve them with the court. When you get to what would be normally a global mediated settlement, I've been involved in these, you actually file that with the court and then you vote on the plan. So here they're saying, look, we're kind of forcing you to vote on whether you like the plan or not, and that becomes a settlement. And that's not technically how it's supposed to be done. And so I don't really know exactly how hard the U.S. is going to fight this. I know the debtors are back because it's effectively the crux of the plan, but it is kind of forcing a settlement. So I don't really know where this one's going to land because it is kind of a gray area in the law. The U.S. trustee is going to say it's black and white letter of the law. You cannot settle, but the debtors are going to say, well, we're not really settling entirely. The only thing you're waiving your rights for is whether or not property was property of the estate or not, which in the US Trustee side, like that wasn't litigated, that wasn't settled. There's nothing that approves that from the court, and the rights of creditors are still technically
Would this
reserved.
lower recovery? That's what people
Right.
care about, right?
Yeah, would
It's not
this
a matter
decrease
of
recovery?
caring, it's a matter of the law, and that's the problem with it. I don't think you would have a lot of creditors out there who would object to something being in the form of a settlement, because at the end of the day, if property rights were adjudicated and all coins were property of customers and not of the estate, it doesn't fully change whether or not the debtor professionals here are going to end up paying themselves well over $1 billion, probably $1.5 billion, because even an administrative expense is required to adjudicate the bankruptcy. The challenge then becomes you're going to have intra-debtor fights, because you're going to have non-customers say, well, BlockFi, I got to a settlement, now you're telling me it's got to be unwound. And so you would create a very large issue that would have to be adjudicated if you do go down the path of fighting for the property rights as opposed to allowing this quasi-settlement. And so I think the debtors will probably have Dorsey on their side in terms of getting to an outcome, as opposed to effectively blowing up the structure of the case, requiring it to be litigated further. If you like restructure the entire plan, like it's not starting from scratch, but like that's many months of work. And so nobody wants that. People want out, right? Like you want to catch the tail end of the bull market. You want to get your crypto out of a US bankruptcy, which I totally understand. You know, side note to anyone out there, like do not keep your crypto on any exchange or anything that is connected to a US entity. It's an unnecessary risk at this point.
I'm somewhat a professional at this now. I'm like a moron, but somewhat of a I didn't really understand what the implications were.
Of
From
the US
the-
trustee's objection?
Yeah, like I didn't really get it. I was like, this all seems technical, and like, what are they saying?
A lot of it was. So the major issues I think will probably side towards like getting the plan moved forward, but caution that I don't know how that one's going to play out.
So it's a nothing burger.
That particular plan supplement issue is a nothing burger. Yeah.
But the principal stuff that we were just talking about, I get a lot of tweets saying, "Hey, Sunil's winning." It's got nothing to do with that.
It is almost nothing. The Rule 1919 settlement does relate to, in effect, forcing a settlement that was stolen from the state, and just saying affirmatively, you're basically waiving any right on suing for the misappropriation of funds and the purported, all these like purported language of what they were saying happened here. And so you are kind of settling that issue. So it's not untethered from it, but it's not like an overlap. And the US Trustee isn't going so far as to say property is of the estate. It's saying that structurally, the way they're doing it is impermissible. They could, in effect, have to do something where they file something separately. They could, have Dorsey kind of overrule it for special circumstances, which everything in this case is unprecedented, so it wouldn't completely surprise me. I mean, you're getting to what sounds like a very consensual plan, right? We don't know the exact numbers. They said 95% who voted yes. We don't know the actual number of votes. I'm still guessing it's like 20 to 30,000 people voted. Maybe it's more. There's hundreds of thousands of potential votes. And then the other thing is they say, 99% of the value. Well, that one can be pretty cherry-picked data, because if you include the IRS and the CFTC as voting yes, that's like over 13 billion of claims voting yes. So it's very easy to get to 99% if you have these massive outliers that are considered yes votes by value.
And we voted yes.
I think most people voted yes.
I mean, just us, people can do the math. This is public information. Like, we have over 4,500 claims and over $250 million of face value.
Either way.
So when will Judge Dorsey be going over these objections and making decisions? Is this coming up soon?
So it'll only get to Dorsey if he can't get to an agreement between now and the 7th. And so that's one element where, yes, the US Trustee has this like fulsome objection, but I would imagine that like between now and the 7th, many of those will just go away. They'll have some purported language change or proposed language change, and all these administrative ones will go away. The big one being the 1919 settlement is kind of the wild card. The convenience class one, maybe it'll take until the 7th to get to finality, but maybe in between now and then, they negotiate changing that to be some value that's lower that the US trustee can approve and decides that it doesn't need a new vote.
Does any
Version
of
of the
this
plan.
impact what people give a shit about, which is like when and how much money am I going to get? I think this is like partly the plan of the debtors is that, well, we're dealing with a bunch of guys like Louis who have too much ADHD to deal with this. And I'm pretty focused. Like I can read through this stuff, but it is just too much, man.
Yeah.
So is there a conclusion of like, is this good or bad? I don't know. I don't get it. I am.
So in layman's terms, I would say the release, exculpation, and discharge objections by the U.S. trustee are sound. They're reasonable. The debtors will fight them because they want to protect their own ass. But I think Dorsey would side with the U.S. trustee and force language on that one. That's where I think the most quote unquote contentious piece of this objection will hit, because the debtors want to buy themselves a release. That's kind of common from any bankruptcy.
Sure.
Any,
Good or bad? Like, do we care?
The average creditor.
it's
Like, does
the thing is getting a discharge for these
creditor-
debtors is just not permissible. It's just structurally, like, they don't deserve it because that's not how Chapter 11 works. So it's
No,
kind
I
of
get it. Like I'm a Turkish barber in Istanbul and I've lost 50K to FTX. I want my money back pronto in stables,
Yeah.
please. Like none of this addresses what creditors actually give a shit about.
particular person won't give a shit, but bankruptcy cases and plans create precedent. From the U.S. trustee standpoint, they are less concerned with speed, to be frank. The majority of these issues that they raise are not things that would delay the confirmation of the plan by much, right? Like,
Okay,
because there's the 7th of October for the hearing, and their estimated date of the effectiveness of the plan is the 31st. That
So
would be a
we're
problem.
going to find out if the plan has been confirmed in October, not September. So we're saying,
Correct.
okay,
October
so by
7th
end of
is the
October.
so the plan would be effect. We'll have a very good understanding on October 7th what
Okay.
that timeline to being effective is, because it's not like the plan doesn't become effective like that very day. There's like things that just have to be finalized, and like 3 weeks basically between the hearing and effective date is tight but doable, unless you have these like major things that then all of a sudden have to be litigated for the plan to be confirmed. We'll also have by the 27th of September the examiner's report. Will that change anything in terms of how anyone looks at this case? Will it have any effect on the plan? Unclear. Probably won't change anything structurally in the plan. And
like at this point in the thing, like it's when and how much is the only thing that matters to me.
to
And
most people,
Probably most creditors.
right, like I'm done with FTX, guys. Like, give me the money. Let's move on with our lives.
understandably so.
There are millions of creditors in this thing.
So if the plan was confirmed in October, then do you have any idea when customers could potentially see their first payout?
Yeah, so the wherever convenience class ends up, if it stays at 50K, they're required to do it within 60 days. So that would put it at December 31. I assume there's going to be some delays on that. So I'm just mentally like January of 25 is a reasonable estimate. If something slips by a week, they'll get it done, early Q1. For Class 5A, anyone above 50K, I've heard people say, oh, it could be like 50%. That doesn't make sense to me for several reasons. One, because if they're already anticipating having 12.6 billion in cash by October 31st, they could have more cash by Q1 of 25 very easily.
We already established that they're assholes. Like,
yes.
Okay, so they're
However,
not like gonna do anything nice.
Oh, they're not. No, I think I could probably say publicly without getting sued, but like I think this case, like they have been malicious. They have been, debtors where I've been able to figure out what I think they're going to do based on what would be kind of the worst outcome for creditors seems to be the default of where this case lands.
Well, it would be awesome if creditors got their first payouts by the end of this year. I hope.
I think they're gonna. I think in Q1 they should be able to do 100 cent dollars for 5A creditors in Q1. I don't see, because the other problem you run into is if you're owing 9% on principal balance, petition date value, but you're only going to end up earning like 4% on your cash, it doesn't make sense to billions of dollars of cash to allow interest to continue to pick at 9%. So I think their goal is to get 100-cent dollars paid out to stop the interest ticking, and they'll pay that out once, so if they have enough cash, I think what they would love to be able to do feasibly is give the 120%, assuming that the 119 slips by, like, call it a month, and pay that out so that they literally have no more. They've paid principal, they've paid the whatever the convenience class lands at in, interest on top of that, get them out of the case. And then once they get through non-customers, payout, which is going to be no more than $2 billion in the end. They're already estimating it under 2, and I think it'll come down further because they're just going to keep fighting. They're going to litigate all these claims down, and once they get non-customers paid out, they literally only have effectively two claimants at that point, the CFTC and the IRS. At that point, part of the reason some of these issues should be dealt with up front is you have a bunch of claims that are 5A, and when and how much you get paid is completely unknown right now. And I don't mean just from when are you going to get petition date value, when and how much interest are you going to get, when and how much money are you going to get from the CFTC Supplemental Remission Fund, and how. All of those are unknowns.
So is even the convenience class's first payout an unknown? I forget what.
No,
what
that's the only one that's certain.
So what was the
Unless they
convenience
change
class?
it because of the objection.
It's certain wherever it lands. But
Okay.
yes, they have an obligation because that's also less, right? So that's even with 119% interest on at the current structure, it's about $1.2 billion to pay out. They already have $12 billion of cash.
I have data. I got my tech guys to get some data. There were 8,477 3001 transfer notices filed in the case.
People who sold their claims.
Yeah, those are all the transfer notices. We filed about 1.2 per claim. Like we initially had a 20% refiling rate, given how shit this was. It was because of the early days. We had to file everything twice. So my estimate is that there's probably only like 6,000 claims that have sold.
And you have how many? 4,000 something?
4,600 and something.
Big shot over here in the claims buying market.
Only big claims have been trading to other buyers, I think. There's
True.
basically like, the second largest owner of claims is like 200 something.
Go, Louis.
Yeah,
You're
by number.
Yeah.
Louis is gonna take me to a
more
nice
money.
Michelin star
Yeah.
meal after this.
You like a
I mean,
Michelin
Chester
star?
has what? So
Basically, all of the big claimants in the case, like I would say a majority of big claimants have sold their claims. Kyle, thank you for all the help you have given to FTX creditors over the last 2 years. You have been probably the most useful voice on X about FTX.
well, I think you guys were all being harmed by the bankruptcy, rightly or wrongly. It's not a fun process. I don't wish it on my worst enemies. It's painful.
Namaste, because I'm namaste in bed.
Bye, Lou. Bye, Kyle.
Thank you.
Cheers.